Hi, where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments.
The air inside the heavily reinforced bunker of cryogenic transfer station Fort did not carry the normal humidity of coastal port. It was stripped completely dry, chilled to a crisp, artificial winter temperature by heavy environmental scrubbers to prevent any moisture from instantly freezing into blinding ice storms on the exposed valve manifolds. It carried the sharp, sterile scent of pure nitrogen purging lines and the distinct, faint electrical smell of high-voltage subsurface pumps operating in a total vacuum. From the thick, triple-paned armored viewing port, the massive liquid natural gas, LNG, distribution lines below looked like a complex network of white frosted monuments, wrapping around 400-ton cryogenic storage tanks that vibrated with a low, deep-frequency hum that passed straight through the heavily insulated soles of my work boots. I sat on a heavy steel drafting stool near the analog pressure differential recorders, my leather technician's vest, thick, stiff from decades of exposure to extreme thermal gradients, and scarred by early cryogenic burn marks, resting flat against my frame. For 43 years, my official title within the Federal Energy Infrastructure and Safety Directorate had been Chief Cryogenic Arbitrator and Senior Thermal Fluid Dynamics Analyst. In the slick, computer-rendered promotional clips of the Modern Energy Consortium, my laboratory was viewed as an expensive, slow-moving historical relic from the early fossil fuel distribution era. The new private terminal operator, Apex Cryologistics, had long since transitioned to using automated infrared laser spectrometers, fiber-optic acoustic temperature strings, and cloud-based algorithmic thermodynamic simulations that treated an unstable, highly volatile liquid gas loop at minus 162 degrees as a simple blue fluid simulation running on an executive's tablet screen. They genuinely believed that loading a massive ocean-going supertanker with millions of gallons of sub-zero liquid was nothing more than a matter of selecting a delivery speed on a touchscreen panel and letting an automated valve do the work. But automated infrared cameras do not calculate the microscopic crystalline structural shifts that occur inside a massive double-walled stainless steel pipe when a sudden atmospheric tide causes the vacuum insulation barrier to slowly leak ambient air. They don't hear the tiny, high-pitched metallic pinging sound that indicates thermal contraction stress is creating a micro fissure along the internal weld lines long before any pressure drop registers on a remote sensor array. I was the man who knew the exact visual weight of a stable cryogenic vapor cloud, the precise sound of a high-pressure pump impeller when it began to experience cavitational boiling, and exactly how many millimeters an expansion joint could compress before the sub-zero liquid would cause the structural steel supports to shatter like fragile glass under a sudden mechanical shock. I was not a corporate hedge fund coordinator, an infrastructure accountant, or a cloud data developer. I was a physical reader of thermal expansion, fluid phase changes, and pressure thresholds who had spent half his career walking the frosted catwalks of gas terminals in freezing sea winds, reading the silent structural indicators that automated telemetry was too blind to interpret. My brother's son, Raymond, stood near the digital manifold console, his spotless, slate-gray cleanroom jacket carrying the sharp chemical smell of freshly unboxed electronics as he scrolled through his company smartphone. He was 36, the regional director of logistics acceleration for Apex Cryo, a man whose entire professional standing was built upon terminal throughput optimization, which in practical terms meant slashing mandatory system cooling loops from 24 hours to 45 minutes, forcing loading crews to pump liquid past the maximum velocity limits to clear the docks faster, and threatening veteran safety engineers with immediate administrative termination if they flagged an entire shipping block due to micro-vacuum degradation warnings. The digital terminal validation certificate from our central system is already verified and uploaded to the International Energy Pool. Uncle Nicholas, Raymond said, his voice holding the rapid, aggressive tempo of an executive whose year-end bonus was calculated by the millions of metric tons of gas cleared through the harbor. The automated fiber optic array checked the temperature gradient across 4,000 independent points along the dock conduit. The expansion delta is perfectly green. The line is mathematically stable. Honestly, at 79, walking the line with a manual ultrasonic leak wand and an old mechanical barograph just to check the vacuum seals is an absurd waste of your remaining physical energy. You're holding up our delivery schedule. He was presenting my systematic exclusion from the cryogenic terminal management roster not as a cold corporate firing, but as a compassionate, protective retirement arrangement designed to save my aging limbs from the freezing ocean drafts. This is the precise, clinical script of modern corporate liquidation. You never tell a master cryogenicist that his physical evaluation of a thermal block is more accurate than your uncalibrated software simulations. You tell him he is too fragile for the cold. The automated fiber optic arrays only read the temperature along the outer protection sheath, Raymond, I said, my voice low, holding the flat, unyielding cadence of a man who spent 40 years speaking over the deafening hiss of high-volume nitrogen bleed valves. The computer doesn't see the thermal bridges forming inside the primary vacuum pocket near the main harbor gate. The validation system was developed by the leading maritime engineering firm in Oslo, Nicholas, he replied, sliding his phone into his internal pocket with a swift, definitive snap. We don't need an old pipe fitter looking at the thickness of frost to tell us if a valve is holding anymore. We are on a 24-hour countdown to initiate the maximum pressure loading phase for the Northern Horizon supertanker before the International Energy Audit window closes. My corporate partners and I have already finalized your enrollment package at the Crestview Alpine Retreat. It's an exclusive luxury community in the high valleys with its own indoor botanical gardens, heated floors, and absolute isolation from industrial coastal zones. What Raymond completely left out of his fast-paced professional summary was the fact that his advancement to Senior Vice President of International Energy Logistics was entirely contingent on clearing the supertanker through the harbor before the end of the fiscal month, and that his private investment syndicate had already shorted the stock of our independent safety testing laboratory to clear the path for a fully automated terminal conversion the moment my regulatory office was shut down. The structural friction between my physical experience on the docks and my nephew's digital acceleration schedule reached a critical threshold exactly 10 days later, during the production loading phase of the main cryoconduit 4 Alpha. The infrastructure component was a massive, 5-foot diameter double-walled delivery pipeline lined with advanced vacuum insulation jackets designed to carry liquid natural gas from the main shore tanks to the harbor loading berths. To the regional operations office, it was a high-revenue cargo asset that needed to be brought up to full flow velocity within 12 hours to avoid a massive non-compliance penalty from the international shipping pool. To Raymond, it was the final physical benchmark that needed to be certified before the corporate directors arrived for the public ribbon-cutting ceremony at the terminal's new automated wing. He came down to the frosted concrete pad of Transfer Station 4 during a heavy, freezing Wednesday evening winter storm, his thin-soled dress, shoes slipping instantly on the slick, salt-encrusted gravel near the secondary pressure valves. He was accompanied by a man named Vance, the newly appointed Commissioner of Regional Maritime Compliance, a 35-year-old business logistics graduate whose understanding of cryogenic fluid dynamics was entirely limited to what he had memorized from data simulation slides during his management courses. Mr. Thorne, Vance said, his voice carrying the sharp, defensive pitch of a corporate bureaucrat whose schedule was being disrupted by a laboratory technicality. We've reviewed the electronic readouts from the conduit's primary vacuum gauges. The pressure lines are completely green. The automated flow control shows 0 velocity drop along the main vertical intake. We need you to sign the formal thermodynamic clearance certificate so the technicians can pull the manual isolation clamps and let the automated system ramp the loading pumps up to full capacity. He held out a sleek, plastic-shelled clipboard with a digital signature application open, a legal document that would completely clear Apex Cryo of any industrial liability if the main pipeline collapsed or the sub-zero liquid caused a catastrophic thermal shock wave along the harbor berths. The digital vacuum sensors are reading the electrical resistance inside the electronic sensor heads. Mr. Vance, I said, keeping my hands buried inside the thick, oil-stained pockets of my canvas inspector's coat. They aren't reading the internal gasification occurring behind the thermal insulation rings near the main harbor gate. The storm outside isn't the problem. The internal phase change is. Raymond stepped directly into the gap between me and the compliance commissioner, his teeth grinding with frustration, his voice rising to a shout to be heard over the deafening, high-pitched mechanical howl of the massive nitrogen compressors. "Nicholas, let's drop the old-timer folklore routine right now. The loading software calculates thermal expansion and checks the vacuum integrity automatically based on electronic microsensors. Every hour this pipeline remains throttled back costs the Syndicate $60,000 in delayed cargo penalties. Your refusal to sign this certificate is a direct violation of your regulatory mandate. If that screen isn't signed by 5 o'clock, Vance and I will execute an emergency administrative override under the Maritime Infrastructure Acceleration Act." He stepped closer, his face inches from mine, his eyes wild with a cold, financial desperation that contained no trace of family loyalty. "We know what this is about, old man. You're terrified that this entire facility is going to run on automated switches without your signature on a piece of paper. But your tenure is finished. If you don't clear this conduit, we will have company security guards escort you out of the gate for industrial obstruction, and your retirement insurance package will be forwarded to the State Compliance Board for an immediate forensic audit." He leaned down until his hard hat pressed against mine. "The Crestview Alpine Retreat doesn't take residence with an open state investigation, Nicholas. You'll be spending your winter in a state-run tenement down by the freight yards where the walls are coated in diesel soot and the floor vibrates every time a coal car rolls past. Sign the clearance and let the pumps roll." The final confrontation did not take place on the frozen concrete of the pump pad. It occurred 48 hours later inside the ultra-modern, glass-walled conference suite of the Global Energy and Maritime Underwriters Syndicate on the 71st floor of the Horizon Tower, a building that looked down onto the shipping channel like a giant, reflective obelisk. Raymond had organized an emergency technical arbitration hearing, using a corporate transport service to bring me there as if I were an obsolete piece of cryogenic machinery being brought before a board of corporate bankruptcy receivers. Chairman Geller, the senior industrial risk underwriter whose global fund had guaranteed $400 million against the completion of the Deepwater Harbor project, sat at the head of the long obsidian table. Next to him sat Raymond, his laptop open to a high-speed simulation loop titled Project Sub-Zero, Liquid Flow Optimization, and Commissioner Vance, who was quietly reviewing a stack of pre-signed environmental waivers. "Mr. Thorne," Chairman Geller began, his voice low, dry, and carrying the absolute emotional coldness of a man who viewed human life as a simple variable in a compound interest table. "Your nephew has presented a highly detailed, data-supported case for the immediate acceleration of the Conduit 4 Alpha terminal loop. The digital metrics indicate that the internal temperatures are well within safe margins. Your continued refusal to sign off on the safety certificate appears to be based entirely on undocumented personal intuition and outmoded manual testing methodologies." The monitor on the boardroom wall flashed a 3D animation of the underground pipe network, showing the blue liquid natural gas flowing smoothly out of the main shore tanks through digital channels into the supertanker's hull, the interface glowing with a bright, reassuring green that indicated a perfectly balanced thermodynamic system. The simulation is running on the assumption that the vacuum barrier is maintaining an absolute thermal isolation under structural load. "Chairman," I said, rising slowly from my chair without using the armrests. I didn't reach for an external hard drive. Instead, I reached into my old leather rigger's case and placed 3 small, heavy metal bolts on the polished surface of the table. Each bolt was 8 inches long, their thick stainless steel threads sheared and twisted into a violent, brittle spiral shape that resembled broken obsidian glass. "In January of 1993, I said, my voice cutting through the room's silent air conditioning with the absolute clarity of an iron yard whistle. The sister system of this conduit, the Berth 2 delivery line, attempted to load a cargo vessel under identical weather conditions. The company computers at the time stated the vacuum seals were fully functional. But the computers didn't calculate what happens when you have a minor atmospheric air leak that introduces trace humidity into a vacuum pocket surrounding a pipe carrying fluid at minus 162 degrees. They didn't calculate the physical phenomenon known as a cryogenic thermal bridge. Raymond slammed his hand onto the table, the glass cups rattling against the granite trim. The 1993 incident involved old first-generation carbon steels. Nicholas. Conduit 4 Alpha uses an advanced double-walled austenitic stainless steel matrix that was formulated and certified by our metallurgical team last month. The steel was certified at room temperature, Raymond. I replied, looking directly at Chairman Geller, whose eyes had shifted from the simulation screen down to the shattered, glass-like bolts on his table. Your loading crew didn't realize that the freezing sea wind yesterday morning didn't just frost the exterior jacket. It cracked the secondary vacuum relief valve on the harbor junction. That crystalline fracture on those bolts isn't normal mechanical wear. It's a result of rapid low-temperature embrittlement. Your automated system is reading the line's output as stable because the pressure at the pumps is high. It's not a functioning cryogenic fluid circuit. It's a thermal time bomb. I pointed out the window toward the gray silhouette of the shipping harbor in the distance. Right now, the liquid gas leaking into that compromised vacuum pocket is expanding at a volumetric ratio of 600 to 1 as it absorbs ambient heat from the outer jacket. Because your sensors are calibrated to read internal fluid velocity rather than external insulation pressure differentials along the casing walls, your software thinks the system is balanced. The moment you force those high-pressure pumps to full loading capacity, the sudden thermal shock wave won't clear the line. It will cause an instantaneous phase change inside the vacuum jacket. The resulting expansion will violently rupture the 5-foot steel conduit, tearing the loading berths off their concrete foundations, spilling millions of gallons of volatile liquid onto the open water, and creating a massive vapor cloud catastrophe that will incinerate the entire port facility within seconds. In the science of industrial cryogenics, there is an absolute physical boundary known as the boiling point phase threshold, the exact volumetric boundary where compressed liquefied gas absorbs enough external heat to instantly expand back into its gaseous state, increasing its structural volume exponentially within a fraction of a second. It is a physical reality that cannot be negotiated by an executive board vote, amended by an insurance syndicate, or hidden behind a corporate presentation on a screen. I pulled a small, frost-damaged red manual from my inside pocket. The original 1993 Federal Maritime Disaster and Cryogenic Safety Registry, certified by the National Bureau of Energy Security and bearing the permanent restrictive stamp thermal vacuum exclusion number 812 Omega. It was a physical document that existed entirely outside the company's cloud network, an original federal safety mandate that could not be deleted by an IT update or overridden by a municipal development waiver. Under Section 28 of the Federal Energy Safety Act, I said, placing the manual directly over Raymond's laptop keyboard, any deep water loading system that exhibits evidence of vacuum envelope degradation during an active coastal freezing storm cannot be granted an international safety clearance for cargo transit without a full physical extraction and manual inspection of every single vacuum seal along the distribution loop. The exclusion on this specific cryogenic circuit is still active, gentlemen. I never cleared it, and the Federal Standards Board never rescinded it. The boardroom became completely devoid of sound, save for the faint, high-altitude creak of the glass wall as a fresh wind gust hit the building. Chairman Geller leaned forward, his manicured fingers lifting the old manual from the keyboard. He flipped to the page with the crimson stamp, his eyes scanning the technical signatures from 33 years ago with a cold, absolute focus. Is this safety exclusion active in the National Regulatory Archive, Vance? Geller asked, his voice dropping into a razor-thin whisper that signaled the immediate termination of his professional patience. Vance's face had turned an ashen, translucent white. He was tapping his tablet screen with desperate speed, his fingers slipping on the smooth glass. I don't have access to the pre-digital regulatory files from a central office. Our system It only displays the active commercial operational updates from 2022 onward. The physical laws of thermodynamics don't live in your system, Vance, I said, taking my manual back from the insurance chairman's desk. They live in the safe at the Station 4 office. If your corporate team forces those pumps tonight before that exclusion is legally resolved, your insurance syndicate will be fully liable for every life lost and every dollar of the maritime asset when that terminal ruptures. Chairman Geller closed his leather portfolio with a sharp, definitive thud that sounded like a pistol shot in the silent boardroom. The insurance clearance for the Apex Cryo project is formally revoked, effective immediately. Shut down the transfer lines. Get the loading crews back on the floor and isolate that conduit before the vacuum jacket collapses. Raymond stood up, his face a distorted mask of panic and corporate fury, his executive composure completely shattered. Uncle Nicholas, you old lunatic, you've ruined us. The investment syndicate, they will call the primary manufacturing bonds tomorrow morning. We've already leveraged our entire corporate capital account against the completion timeline. If that certificate is frozen, we're completely bankrupt by Friday. I didn't leverage your capital against an unverified insulation barrier, Raymond. Your own arrogance did, I said, packing my shattered steel bolts back into my case. You assume that because an old man spent his life reading the frost patterns in a concrete bunker, his knowledge was obsolete and his codebooks were garbage. But a cryogenicist's job is to read the reality of the thermal gradient, not the profit of the buyer. The financial collapse of Apex Cryo Logistics was not a gradual decline. It was a sudden, vertical liquidation that erased the company from the National Maritime Registry within 90 days. The Federal Energy Board and the International Shipping Pool withdrew their multi-million-dollar purchasing agreements within 48 hours of a federal engineering team confirming the severe vacuum failure and structural steel embrittlement along the Station 4 delivery line. The cost of running an emergency thermal isolation program, rebuilding the vacuum jacket walls, and remanning the terminal berths exceeded $45 million, a capital expenditure that made the entire Deepwater Port project completely toxic to institutional investors. Without the expected delivery bonus from the production timeline to clear their outstanding secondary credit lines, Raymond's partnership filed for Chapter 7 liquidation before the winter ice had closed the heavy transport shipping lanes. His luxury corporate sedan was towed out of his suburban driveway in mid-January, a quiet financial repossession witnessed only by the local municipal sanitation workers who watched the bank's agents load it onto a flatbed truck in the gray morning slush. Raymond called the transfer bunker house line once during the spring thaw, his voice hollow, flat, and completely stripped of his former corporate cadence. He spoke for less than 2 minutes, asking if I could use my standing as a lifetime member of the Energy Inspectors Union to help him secure an entry-level position as an assistant valve seal checker on the low-priority agricultural liquid ammonia storage yards in the Southern Flats. I told him that the ammonia yards were using automated drone sweeps now, and that the computers had no operational space for an executive who didn't understand how to read the physical expansion of a cryogenic line. I was not moved to the Crestview Alpine Retreat. The National Safety Board quietly canceled my retirement notice the following Monday afternoon. They realized that without my specific physical understanding of cryogenic fluid dynamics and the undigitized vacuum acts, they couldn't certify a single infrastructure terminal in the energy sector without risking a structural disaster that would void their national insurance policy. They created a permanent position for me, Chief Cryogenic Arbitrator and Subsurface Thermal Security Custodian for the Federal District. My salary is now paid directly out of the nation's core industrial security account, more than enough to keep my office warm through the winter storms without ever needing to look at a corporate senior community brochure. I still sit on my high steel stool in the observation room of Station 4, watching the digital telemetry lines flicker on the automated spectrometer screens below. The conduits operate under my supervision now, their vacuum pressures cross-checked every morning against my manual barographs, and the liquid natural gas leaves the floor at a slow, measured pace, its transfer velocity kept strictly below the critical threshold until the underground thermal circuit has found its perfect, permanent balance within the jacket. The younger generation operates under the dangerous, modern delusion that technology is the same thing as control, and that a three-dimensional animation can force the fluid to ignore the laws of physics. They believe that success is a matter of simply accelerating the schedule and erasing the manual safety margins of the past to maximize a quarterly return. But they do not understand that the freezing cold does not look at your investment targets, and the boiling liquid does not care about your promotion timeline. Every commercial empire, every high-tech fortune, and every family dynamic is ultimately subject to the physical limits of the material below. My nephew thought he was optimizing a slow asset when he tried to clear away my experience and force me out of the bunker. He didn't have the functional capacity to understand that the old, quiet man he viewed as an operational bottleneck was the only structural anchor keeping his entire world from being torn apart by the weight of the expanding gas. In the end, he wasn't defeated by a family feud or an elaborate legal conspiracy. He was simply broken by the unyielding laws of the boiling point phase threshold he refused to believe was real.